All right, guys, how's it going? I hope you guys are doing well, and I hope you're enjoying Mr. Popper's Penguins so far. We read chapters 5 and 6 yesterday, day before, whenever it is y'all are listening to this, and we learned that penguins can be a lot of work, a lot of trouble. Mr. Popper needed to get some holes, some ventilation, so that air could get into the icebox or the refrigerator. So we needed some holes poked into those. So we called a serviceman to come out and do that for him. And the serviceman just thought he was crazy about needing holes in a perfectly good refrigerator and did not understand at all why he was asking for this. So he ended up running out of the house and running into the penguin, and then told the policeman. The policeman stopped by the house and said, I don't know anything about, ordinances on penguins or licenses for penguins, so you need to call the city. Well, then he got the runaround at the city. He got redirected here and then redirected to this person and then this person, and nobody knew what he was talking about. Called him all kinds of names. It's just off. Everybody was off. Nobody could understand. So Mr. Popper says, well, fine. If you can't tell me what to do, then I'm going to keep my penguin and keep on rocking and rolling. So that's what he did. So we're going to look at chapter 7 and chapter 8 today. Chapter 7 is called Captain Cook Builds a Nest. Very reluctantly, Janie and Bill had to leave Captain Cook and go to school. Mrs. Popper was busy in the kitchen, rather belatedly doing the breakfast dishes, and while she dimly realized that the penguin was going in and out of the refrigerator pretty quickly, she thought nothing of it at first. Meanwhile, Mr. Popper had abandoned his telephoning and was now busy shaving and making himself neat in honor of being the owner of such a splendid bird as Captain Cook. But the penguin, though thus neglected for the moment, was by no means idle. He was not still. With the unusual excitement and having to go to the market earlier than usual, Mrs. Popper had not yet got around to straightening the house. She was an excellent housekeeper, still with 2 children like Janie and Bill and a husband with such untidy ways. There is no denying the fact that she had to pick up the place rather frequently. Captain Cook was now attending to the picking up. Into the corners of every room he prowled and poked and pecked with a busy thoroughness. Into every closet he stared with his white-eyed circles. Under and behind all the furniture he crowded his plump figure with little subdued cries of curiosity, surprise, and pleasure. And each time he found what he seemed to be looking for, he picked it up in the black end of his red beak and carried it, waddling proudly on his wide pink feet into the kitchen and into the icebox. So every time he found something fun, he took it with him into the refrigerator. At last it occurred to Mrs. Popper to wonder what on earth the busy bird was up to. When she looked, she could only scream to Mr. Popper to come quickly and see what Captain Cook had done now. Mr. Popper himself looking rather remarkable, as Mrs. Popper noticed later, joining her and staring with astonishment into the refrigerator. Captain Cook came up too and helped them look. Ork, ork, he said with triumph. Mrs. Popper laughed and Mr. Popper gasped as they saw the results of Captain Cook's trips through the house. So here he is, little picture there. What do you think he's doing? What do you think he's getting all of this stuff for? So, 2 spools of thread, 1 white chess bishop, and 6 parts of a jigsaw puzzle, a teaspoon and a closed box of safety matches, a radish, 2 pennies, a nickel, and a golf ball, 2 pencil stubs, 1 bent playing card, and a small ashtray, 5 hairpins, an olive, 2 dominoes, and a sock. Not done yet. A nail file, 4 buttons of various sizes, a telephone slug, Eve, 7 marbles, and a tiny doll's chair. 5 checker pieces, a bit of a graham cracker, a Parcheesi cup, and an eraser. A drawer key, a button hook, a crumpled piece of tin foil, half of a very old lemon, the head of a china doll, Mr. Popper's pipe, and a ginger ale cap, an ink bottle cork, 2 screws, and a belt buckle. 6 beads from a child's necklace, 5 building blocks, a darning egg, a bone, a small harmonica, and a partly consumed lollipop. 2 toothpaste lids, and a small red notebook. Well, I guess this is what you call the rookery, said Mr. Popper, only he couldn't find any stones to build his nest with. Well, said Mrs. Popper, those penguins may have heathen ways at the South Pole, but I declare declare I think this one is going to be quite the help around the house. Ork, said Captain Cook, and strutting into the living room, he knocked over the best lamp. I think, Papa, said Mrs. Popper, that you had better take Captain Cook outside for a little exercise. Good gracious, but you're all dressed up. Why, you look almost like a penguin yourself. Mr. Popper had smoothed down his hair and shaved off the whiskers. Never again would Mrs. Popper have to reproach him for looking as wild as a lion. He had put on a white shirt with a white tie and white flannel trousers and a pair of bright tan oxblood shoes. He had got out the cedar chest with his old black evening tailcoat that he had been married in, and brushed it carefully and put it on. He did indeed look like a penguin. He turned and strutted like one for Mrs. Popper. But he did not forget his duty to Captain Cook. Can I have a few yards of clothesline, please, Mamma? Said Mr. Popper. Why does he need clothesline? What's happening? All right, chapter 8. This one is called Penguin's Promenade. Mr. Popper soon found that it was not so easy to take a penguin for a stroll. Mr. Renee. Mr. Popper soon found that it was not so easy to take a penguin for a stroll. Captain Cook did not care at first for the idea of being put on a leash. However, Mr. Popper was firm. He tried one end of the clothesline to the penguin's fat throat and the other to his own wrist. Ork, said Captain Cook indignantly. Still, he was a very reasonable sort of bird, and when he saw that protesting did him no good, he recovered his customary dignity and decided to let Mr. Popper lead him. Mr. Popper put on his best Sunday derby and opened the front door with Captain Cook waddling graciously beside him. Gall, said the penguin, stopping at the edge of the porch to look down at the steps. Mr. Popper gave him plenty of clothesline leash. Gook, said Captain Cook, and raising his flippers, he leaned bravely and tobogganed down the steps on his stomach. Mr. Popper followed, though not in the same way. Captain Cook quickly got on his feet again and strutted to the street ahead of Mr. Popper with many quick turns of his head and pleased comments on the new scene. Down Proudfoot Avenue came a neighbor of the Poppers, Mrs. Callahan, with her arms full of groceries. She stared in astonishment at what she saw of Captain Cook and Mr. Popper looking like a large penguin himself in his black tailcoat. Heavens have mercy on us all, she exclaimed, as the bird began to investigate the striped stockings under her dress. It isn't an owl, and it isn't a goose. It isn't, said Mr. Popper, tipping his Sunday hat. It's an Antarctic penguin, Mrs. Callahan. Get away from me, said Mrs. Callahan to Captain Cook. An anteater, is it? No, not an anteater, explained Mr. Popper. Antarctic. It was sent to me from the South Pole. Take your South Pole goose away from me at once, said Mrs. Callahan. Mr. Popper pulled obediently on the clothesline while Captain Cook took a parting peck at Mrs. Callahan's striped stockings. Heaven preserve us, said Mrs. Callahan. I must stop in and see Mrs. Popper at once. I would never have believed it. I will be going now. So will I, said Mr. Popper as Captain Cook dragged him off down the street. Their next stop was at the drugstore at the corner of Proudfoot Avenue and Main Street. Here, Captain Cook insisted on looking over the window display, which consisted of several open packages of shiny white boron crystals. These he evidently mistook for polar snow, for he began to peck at the window vigorously. Suddenly, a car wheeled to the nearby curb with a shriek of its brakes, and two young men sprang out, one of them with a camera. This must be it, said the first young man to the other. It's them, all right, said the second young man. The cameraman set up his tripod on the sidewalk. By this time, a small crowd had gathered around, and two men in white coats had even come out of the drugstore to watch. Captain Cook, however, was still too much interested in the window exhibits to bother to turn around. You're Mr. Popper of 432 Proudfoot Avenue, aren't you? Asked the second young man, pulling a notebook out of his pocket. Yes, said Mr. Popper, realizing that his picture was about to be taken for the newspaper. The two young men had, as a matter of fact, heard about this strange bird from the policeman and had been on their way to the Popper house to get an interview when they saw Captain Cook. Hey, Pelican, turn around and see the pretty birdie, said the photographer. That's no pelican, the other said, who was a reporter. Pelicans have a pouch in their bills. I'd think it was a dodo, only dodos are extinct. This will make an elegant picture if I can ever get her to just turn around. It's a penguin, said Mr. Popper proudly. Its name is Captain Cook. Gook, said the penguin, turning around now that they were talking about him. Spying the camera tripod, he walked over to it and examined it. Probably thinks it's a three-legged stork, said the photographer. This bird of yours, said the reporter, is it a he or a she? The public will want to know. Mr. Popper hesitated. Well, I call it Captain Cook. Well, that makes it a he, said the reporter, writing rapidly in his notebook. Still curious, Captain Cook started walking around and around the tripod till the clothesline, the penguin, Mr. Popper, and the tripod were all tangled up. At the advice of one of the bystanders, the tangle was finally straightened out by Mr. Popper walking around the tripod 3 times in the opposite direction. At last, Captain Cook, standing still beside Mr. Popper, consented to pose. Mr. Popper straightened his tie, and the cameraman snapped the picture. Captain Cook shut his eyes, and this is the way his picture appeared later in all the newspapers. One last question, said the reporter. Where did you get this strange pet? From Admiral Drake, the South Pole explorer. He sent him to me for a present. Yeah, said the reporter. Anyway, yep, it's a good story. The 2 young men jumped back into their car. Mr. Popper and Captain Cook continued their walk with quite a crowd following behind and asking lots of questions. The crowd was getting so thick that in order to escape, Mr. Popper led Captain Cook into a barber shop. The man who kept the barber shop had, up to this time, been a very good friend of Mr. Popper's. I wonder if that means something's going to go on with that barber. Maybe he's not such a good friend after all. We'll have to see. Hope you guys like it. Bye!